Well, I already covered my favorite Neo-Geo game. I guess it's time to talk about probably one of the most famous. This is Metal Slug on the Neo-Geo, played on the Xbox One thanks to, once again, the little digital Neo-Geo library that has sort of become available to it. It's a very good game. I think it's sort of part of the whole quintessential Neo-Geo experience, which would explain why it's probably one of the most readily available Neo-Geo games, and one of the longest running series to come out of the Neo-Geo. There isn't really all that much of a story to it. It's mostly just run to the right, shoot some dudes, free some prisoners, and, you know, win the war. What is interesting is how tonally strange this game is, though, because there's copious amounts of blood and gore, but it's also got something of a darkly comedic edge to it. At moments you'll rescue a prisoner, and then he'll proceed to rip off his underpants to give you some kind of power-up. There's so much in this game that feels equal parts sort of dark, but also really kind of goofy. And I think that's part of why this game succeeds more so than its contemporaries, such as Contra. Because sure, it has that sort of dark, gritty war aesthetic, but it's also trying to be sort of a goofy, lighthearted romp. And I think in that regard it succeeds quite well. Now the gameplay to this is similar to any other run and gun. You run, you jump, you shoot, you kill everything in your way, you fight some bosses, you get to the end, you have a grand old time. However, there are a few things that make this game pretty unique. The biggest and most important one being the titular Metal Slug. A giant awesome tank that not only allows you to have basically a health bar because you die in one hit otherwise, but it's a tank. You can shoot with its giant cannons as well as its little machine gun and do a lot of damage very quickly. Because it's an arcade game, there's a lot of benefit to not losing the Metal Slug. First and foremost, again, you've got basically an extended health bar with this thing, plus a lot of extra damage potential. But if you can get to the end of the level with an intact Metal Slug, you get a huge points bonus. And if you take that into consideration as you approach gameplay, it actually means you have to play a lot more cautiously. And because this is an arcade game, you are on a timer, and that creates an interesting little duality. You know, the timer's constantly pushing you to move forward, but it's the sake of your safety and your tank's safety and all the points you're going to get from that that makes you want to hold back and take a slower route. That concept alone makes this game really impressive for simply pushing the arcade mentality of trying to get as many points as possible and to make multiple attempts to see if you can do better and see what different strategies you can come up with. The second aspect that makes this game different than, say, Contra or really any other run-and-gun style game is the concept of prisoners. Basically, you see these POWs sitting around tied to a stake, you shoot off their bonds, and then they proceed to walk around, and if you're lucky, and you get up and say hi, they'll give you some sort of power-up or something for points. Now what I don't like about this is at least the point parts, the power-ups seem pretty consistent, but the point parts seem largely randomized. And in a game about trying to gain points, randomizing things that give you bonus points is kind of a problem. And honestly, I wouldn't have noticed this if I wasn't playing this particular version, which has like two different types of score attack mode, where you're trying to get the score as high as possible later on, and running through the same route a couple times and getting different point totals because of their drops kind of made that a little infuriating. Consistency, come on. But like I said, in addition to points, they also give weapons. Rocket launchers, which do a ton of damage and have a slight homing advantage, but are kind of awkward to aim initially. You have shotguns, which are great for clearing out large numbers of thickly packed enemies close to you, as well as flamethrowers, which set your opponents on fire and make them dance about a bit. And seriously, this game is really freaking detailed. Flamethrowers are awesome, and this game just continues to prove that fact. In addition, you have one other weapon at your disposal. Kind of like how I said during my Shock Troopers review, it was kind of similar to Metal Slug. And I actually forgot about this when I was talking about that game, but like Shock Troopers, if you get close enough to your opponent, you won't fire your gun, you'll actually slash with your knife. Now in Shock Troopers, there was a strategic advantage to this. You attack people with your knives, you get bonus points, and you get power-ups. There was a lot of strategic importance to doing that. Whereas here, it basically just saves you a bullet. And unless you're using special weapons, that's not really going to do all that much, so it is more or less purely a visual thing. But it's still an extra little bit of nice detail to this game, and of course, if you are using those special weapons, it saves you a little bit of ammo, which could help you in the long run. There's also grenades which you have equipped to yourself, and they're kind of like your, I wouldn't say be-all end-all weapon or anything, but they do a little bit more damage than your gun, and it's fun to spam if you're sort of in your death throws, because they don't carry over from live to live. They're definitely sort of your Hail Mary, last-ditch effort, try to survive thing, or a useful tool to take down super powerful enemies, because they do seem to do a bit more damage. Now, this game being an arcade game, it is real tough. I mean, have you seen how many times I've died up to this point? I actually went on and set it to like 99 lives just so I could get a full playthrough through here, but this game is really tough. It wasn't until I made like a second and third playthrough after I stopped recording to do like the score attack stuff for funsies just to see how different it was that I actually started picking up on how to get a little better at this game. It is difficult. You are one shot, one kill, and sometimes you run into enemies that aren't, specifically the mini-bosses, and man, the mini-bosses are cool. Giant tanks, helicopters, pretty much your standard fare for these kind of games, but they still like to spice it up a little bit. Like when you fight a giant tank, it comes bursting through the background, and you actually have to fight it from the background. And that actually ends up leading to something I found to be a little bit awkward. Now granted, this might simply be, again, trying to translate an arcade game to a controller, but aiming in this game is a little bit tough. You only get to aim to the left and right and straight up. There's no angled shots or anything, which actually makes it kind of awkward. And because you have to kind of commit to aiming in one direction, if you get jumped by someone by the sides, you kind of have to make that snap decision whether or not you want to shoot the enemies that are coming at you or try and finish off the thing above you, which came up a few times, not too many mind you, but still sometimes. And the thing is, while it does make the controls feel a little bit awkward, it does feel like the game was designed around them intentionally. Like I said, it does get really tense when you're getting sort of sandwiched in by a bunch of different enemies and you have to figure out where specifically you have to concentrate your bullets if you want to survive. And that's brilliant. This game isn't also strictly a horizontal affair. There are levels that have a little bit of verticality built into them, such as the mountain climbing level, which does mix things up a fair bit. And I definitely appreciate that. Overall, this game is a high-quality gameplay experience that is just very enjoyable. That said, it does feel like it's the start of something. Like, I can tell you there's a bunch of different Metal Slug games after that that kind of refine what this game has, and it does feel like the starting point, so it does feel a little bit rough around the edges, but it's still quite enjoyable. And the thing that I think would make you run to this game over any other one is the power fantasy of just getting the Metal Slug, because you feel so much more powerful when you're driving a giant tank. That's awesome. When you fire off its giant cannon, that's amazing. When you crush a car underneath your treads, that is exhilarating. Sure, it's basically just an extended health bar and a slightly different weapon set, but you know what? Damn it, that was fun. Now, the overall presentation to Metal Slug is awesome. I mean, it's a Neo-Geo game. It's going to be. However, this is where I start to have problems with this game. First and foremost is the presentation. It's beautiful, it's incredibly detailed, it's impressively animated, and there is just a lot to see in this game. But I feel like it's at conflict with the narrative tone of this game. The tone of this game is, of course, war is bad, but also there's some goofy moments here and there. But the visual design feels like it just stops at war is bad. And what I mean by that is, you know, you see comedic moments in the animation, you see comedic moments sort of told in place of a narrative through the presentation, but the actual world designs themselves are really, really desaturated and bland. There's a lot of whites and grays and browns, whereas if you compare it to Shock Troopers, a game that did basically the same thing, that game favors a lot more greens and blues and colors with a higher contrast that stand out a little bit more and makes it a little bit more visually appealing. Whereas this game, visually, it really doesn't do anything for me. Even though it does use those beautifully chunky Neo-Geo pixels that I love with a passion, even though it has the awesome animation of all the various characters, even though the POWs ripping off their underpants to give you a reward is really goofy, you know, the world itself feels like it's not something that's accepting of this sort of goofiness. And that just comes across as atonal at times. And audio-wise, the soundtrack is alright. I think the main theme to this game is amazing, but I really can't remember anything else about the soundtrack to this game. You know, I could sing the theme song to this game in my head right now, but I, for the life of me, cannot remember anything else about it, making it kind of overall just sort of bland, minus that one awesome song. Leading to a impressive presentation, but it definitely has its low points from my perspective. Now, if you want a copy on the Neo-Geo MVS arcade system, cheapest one I'm seeing right now is shipping included about $300, but I mean, it is a cartridge for an arcade system. I think that's to be understandable. A little bit more of a practical way for the average person to play this would be through downloading it on Xbox One, PS3, Switch. I think the Wii has a version of it, PS4, and all of that should be no more than maybe $15. I'm playing this on the Xbox One, and contrary to what I said last time about how these games don't seem to ever go on sale, it seems at least on the Xbox One, every month they're putting 2 or 3 games out on sale. So even though it's outside of my budget right now, and, you know, unnecessary plug, but feel free to support this show through its PayPal or Patreon, so I can't afford to keep doing this, because that would be great. You know, I'm going to try and pick up one every sale I see, just so that we can keep doing this. I'm going to try and find the money to pick one of these up every sale I see one, just so that we can keep doing this, because I love these Neo-Geo games. But that's definitely an easier to get a hold of, more affordable means to play Metal Slug. It was also available on the Neo-Geo SNK Arcade Classics Volume 1, which was on the PSP, the Wii, which is apparently the best version, as well as the PS2, which was a pretty hard to find compilation from what I've seen, as well as getting its whole series anthology, which was available on the Wii, PS2, and I believe original Xbox. Now it sort of comes down to, would I recommend Metal Slug? Well, absolutely, it's a must-have for the Neo Geo, and I think it's a very indicative experience to what the Neo Geo is. If you want to experience what the Neo Geo was at its heart, I think Metal Slug is an absolute must-have experience. That said, there are a few caveats to this. First of all, I don't think you can recommend Metal Slug without recommending its series, and I absolutely do, but if I'm going to do that, then I have to say that this is not the one I would recommend most out of all of them. I'm not exactly the biggest expert on Metal Slug. I've only played 3 official games and 1 unofficial game, but out of the 4 I've played, the one I'd recommend most is Metal Slug 3, which had more levels, more routes, secrets, more characters, and basically just takes everything this did and cranks it up to 11. Seriously, Metal Slug 3 is awesome. I've also played, I think it was either Metal Slug X or Metal Slug XX, and that felt like a pale imitation to Metal Slug 3. But the original Metal Slug is a great game, and while I would easily recommend this as sort of a great introduction to the Neo Geo experience, there are definitely games in the series, and even games on the Neo Geo I'd recommend above this. I mean, just go look at my Shock Troopers video to see a game that does this, but basically better. That said, that game didn't have giant awesome tanks that give you a great sense of power, but it had color, and more characters. But regardless, Metal Slug is an absolute blast to play, and it is, at its core, the heart of what the Neo Geo was. And because of that, I think this is an absolute must-play game.